Hello folks, while this week wasn't a new patch release week, it still felt very much like one, with the launch of Turbo Boost and Phase 2 of Legion Remix. Turbo Boost saw the removal of the crest caps, making it easier to both farm crests and to upgrade our excess of lower level crests, unlocking a lot of extra player power for some, and the return of the puzzling cartel chips came with 2 new vendors who offer a wide selection of trinkets, weapons, op-hands and even a lone single ring. This did come with a couple of unannounced bonuses, including the addition of the Mythic Plus Warbound gear chest on Agmera, who stands beside the Mythic Plus portals in Donegal. This costs 350 flight stones and rewards a random 1 out of 1 champion piece, making for a great sink for any excess flight stones, especially for people with a lot of alts, although there is currently a little bit of a sting in the tail. More on that in a moment. With this coming along with increased Warbound upon equip drops from Raid, Mythic Plus and Delves, this could be the best time to start getting your alts prepared for midnight. And the other unannounced bonus was the doubling of Gilded Crest drop from the weekly Delver's Bounty map, which means that Delve-only players can now get 41 Gilded Crests a week, which, given the extra upgrade tiers and the ability to upgrade crafted gear all the way to item level 726, I think will be very welcome for those players who don't have another source of Gilded Crests. Sadly, though, we also saw another very common feature of a WoW patch day, and that was bugs. The most eye-catching on day one being that the quest to obtain the puzzling cartel chips was fully repeatable and farmable, though that was unsurprisingly very quickly fixed, with the excess chips being removed from players where possible. And for those players who did manage to spend those excess chips before they were reclaimed, they will now have to wait while the rest of us catch up with them. Much more annoyingly though, some of us have found that the MythTrack gear vendor is refusing to sell us any Mythic Plus items, even though we have met the requirement of timing all plus 12 keys in Season 3. This particular issue is not affecting everyone, and in some cases people have managed to buy items from certain dungeons, but not others. I have seen a theory that the plus 12 dungeons timed after patch 11.25 are the only ones that are currently counting towards unlocking the vendor, and that certainly does align with my own experience. But either way, I do hope that Blizzard get this fixed quickly, as it's a pretty major downer for anyone who put a lot of effort into getting their keys in anticipation of unlocking this vendor. And if that particular issue isn't enough, that Mythic Plus Warbound gear chest is awarding items that cannot be put through the catalyst. What this means is that you may want to start to delay your purchases until these issues are finally fixed. Despite all of these teething problems though, Donegal was still very busy in reset day this week, as were the brand new vendors, so it certainly does seem that Turbo Boost is getting at least some of us to take some time out and come back and revisit the live game. On the subject of Remix, and the launch of Phase 2 sees the opening up of the Nighthold Raid and the Karazhan Mega Dungeon, along with the final parts of the Suramar questline, giving a bunch of additional new ways to farm bronze and infinite power. This was not bug-free either though, with that additional infinite knowledge that can now be earned seemingly reducing instead of increasing infinite power gains. Fortunately, this is one bug that the dev team have already hotfixed. And as promised, healers and DPS in Remix have received another set of buffs to their power, which are coming on top of the buffs that were applied last week, in a fresh attempt to overcome the ongoing 5-tank meta in Mythic Plus. Healer and DPS damage is being increased by 10%, but much more importantly, damage taken is being reduced by 33%, and DPS and healer health pools are being doubled in size. Healers get even more, with a 10% increase to their healing and damage absorbs, which will dovetail with tanks getting a 10% increase in healing received. The most important part of these buffs is of course that defensive change, as survivability issues have been the main root cause of the all-tank meta. The question of course is, will this be enough to reset that meta? And I do think that it does have some potential to at least put a dent in it, but time will need to tell on that subject. A much more below the radar update to the live game this week though has been to the Cooldown Manager, which in a pre-reset day hotfix saw the addition to the buff tracker of many of the buffs that had previously been missing. While the Cooldown Manager had seen some major improvements in patch 11.2.5, its buff tracker had some very strange omissions, like Protection Paladin's Argent Defender, which severely limited its ability to start taking over the load from weak auras. With this week's hotfix, many of these gaps have now been filled, which is for sure very welcome, but as someone who reported some of these gaps on the PTR several weeks before 11.2.5 launched, I'm mystified why it's taken this long for them to be filled, especially at a time when the development team are trying to convince the player base that their user interface replacements will actually be able to replace the lost add-on functionality in Midnight. And finally, for the live game for this week, the temporary Hallows End mount, the magic broomstick, has finally been converted to use Skyriding. This mount has always been a very popular feature of Hallows End due to it being an instant cast mount, but ever since Dragonflight, its utility had been severely degraded by it being steady flight only. For some unknown reason, this year it started out as being a weird ground only mount, but that has thankfully been hotfixed to not just restore its original functionality, but with the addition of fully fledged Skyriding, meaning that if you want to rock a full Hallows End look, now you can. Anyways, that's all for the live game for this week. On the 11.2.7 PTR, and testing has been taking a very unusual path, with the PTR being offline for the majority of the time since the 11.2.7 preview was released. This is most likely due to player housing, and over the weekend, housing was opened up for public testing. This led to the PTR probably being the busiest that I've ever seen it, and predictably enough, given its limited capacity, there were for sure some stability issues. That said, at the time I dropped in player housing, it was up and running, offering people who hadn't locked out in alpha access a chance to give the hot new feature a try. And initial impressions of the player base have, I think, been very positive. As a genuine stress test, there was for sure some glitches and bugs to be found, but there were no major progress blockers. I will be doing a fuller preview of player housing in a separate video, so subscribe if you don't want to miss that, but the fundamentals of the housing system are very strong indeed. Even for someone like me who has next to no 3D modelling abilities, creating decent looking room layouts and even exterior decoration was intuitive and easy to do. There were occasional odd glitches, like items resizing as you move them or escaping from the mouse pointer, but to be honest, anytime I've played about with even professional 3D packages, they have those issues as well. And this test offers some great opportunities for players to showcase their abilities, producing some rather interesting constructions indeed. That said, that ability to decorate exteriors is proven to be a bit of a mixed blessing, and I do have some mixed feelings about how our neighbourhoods might end up looking, especially the public ones, when this feature goes live. Along with player housing, the only other main patch feature that was available to test was the 11.2.7 campaign. I'm not going to share any details of that at all here, as it would be ultra spoilery if I did, but I will say that the campaign was very surprising, both in its setting and who we share the journey with. And I think that when this goes live, it's going to turn out to be a bit controversial, and definitely one that some players are going to love, while others will end up hating. The PTR did include a couple of unannounced changes that we initially were expecting for Midnight, but now look like they might be coming out a little bit earlier. The first of those is changes to the main portal rooms. For example, in Stormwind, the portal to the player housing zone will be replacing the Azuna portal, and the Donegal portal is being moved opposite to the former Ashran portal location, with those two older portals being displaced into the annex. And similar changes have also been made in Orgrimmar to its portal room. The other early change is to Skyriding, which is going to be seeing the Vigor system being replaced with a charge-based system. Essentially, Skyward Ascent and Surge Forward will now have 6 shared charges on a 10-second recharge timer. This recharge timer is halved when you fly fast enough. And we're also seeing the removal of the bronze time lock feature. But one really nice quality of life addition is that pressing the spacebar to take off no longer consumes a charge, making zipping around quest objectives or farming a lot smoother. Overall, I found that when I tested it in the PTR, you don't really notice any of these changes beyond no longer having the visual of the vigor charges filling up over time. After the housing test ended, the PTR was put offline for several days, and I was starting to wonder if we'd ever get to test the other features, especially the new Brawler's Guild, which is returning in the next patch. That question was answered with the launch just overnight of the next phase of PTR testing, which is indeed focusing on that new Brawler's Guild. This came a bit too late for me to dive into it prior to recording this video, so I'll be sharing my first impressions in next week's news update. But the new Brawler's Guild is going to be offering 2 brand new mounts, recolours of the Crocolis mount and a new rocket, along with some promised new housing rewards. Also in this new PTR build came the announcement that some older non-Warbound currencies, Apexis crystals from Warlords of Draenor, and Order resources and Veiled Argonite from Legion are to become Warbound. There are still quite a few older currencies which remain weirdly excluded from the account-wide everything mantra, with other examples including most holiday currencies such as the current Hallows End currency. I get why some current season player power currencies need to be soulbound, but I don't really understand why the development team are so reluctant to not just fully open up those holiday and older content currencies to be fully warbound across the board. Now, the PTR player housing test did seem to have a bit of a knock-on effect to this week's Midnight Alpha build, which launched with player housing disabled. The developers have explained that it's been taken offline for them to work on some outstanding bugs and issues, which I think is actually good news, as it demonstrates that the dev team got plenty of data from their testing, which will very likely result in making player housing a bit more of a polished experience when it goes live. Beyond player housing, this week opens up the final zone of Voidstorm for testing along with the Slayer's Rise, the new open world PvP area. This is a subzone of Voidstorm that harks back to things like Wintergrasp and Talbarad. Now, Slayer's Rise isn't the same scale as those full-sized older zones, and it also very unusually offers some PvE content with weekly quests, side quests, and access to the PvP world quests with War Mode off. Turning on War Mode will open up a series of PvP exclusive events, which will include an escort event called Dominar Escort, where you can attack the enemy's escort to slow it down in a race, a resource capture event where you'll capture void energy to turn into your faction headquarters, and ethereal control zones and void post controls which you'll have to capture, in a mechanic which very much reminds me of the tower capture PvP mini-game in Burning Crusade. Overall, while I do think that many of these events are going to feel quite familiar to WoW PvP veterans, having multiple of these events running in the same area does still feel to me like the WoW team are taking a much bigger swing at WoW PvP than they have for quite a long time now. And on top of all of these new events, the zone is also going to include a new neutral PvP hub and dueling area. It has been a very long time since the expansion PvP hub has been outside the main expansion city, Mists of Pandaria in fact, so this new area could well trigger some nostalgia for World PvP fans. World PvP has in my opinion felt very neglected ever since the end of Battle for Azeroth, and hopefully this new format is going to serve to give a bit of a shot in the arm, as there aren't many of us who currently have really no reason to ever turn on War Mode. Moving on now to PvE, and for fans of the Delve Challenge bosses, a brand new seasonal Hall of Fame achievement has been added. This will be awarded for the first 1,000 players to defeat the seasonal challenge boss solo, which for the first season will be called Nullius. This achievement, Fabled Let Me Solo Him, will award a title, Fabled Vanquisher of Nullius. Now, throughout the War Within, these challenge bosses have, in my opinion, been getting harder and harder, and this suggests to me that we shouldn't expect any let up in that. Something that I think could be very welcome for fans of the Legion Maid Shower, as these bosses have been well on the way to starting to fill that particular void. That said, with their increasing difficulty, their association with Delve content is becoming a little bit strange to me, as Delves are clearly not designed designed to be super hard, and the gap between a level 11 delve and these challenge bosses, especially in hard mode, is getting extremely wide indeed. Most of the other PvE changes on the alpha though have been around classes, with the reveal of the remainder of the main class sets, along with some major updates which are aimed at healers. The majority of healers are having their interrupts removed, with the exception of Shaman, who is instead getting a bit of a longer cooldown. In a developer note, the developers explained that this is part of the goal to reduce pressure on healers, who often find themselves being asked to not just heal, but also to manage dispels and even interrupts, especially in lower and mainstream Mythic Plus keys. To compensate for this, the team are changing how enemy NPC caster packs behave, where these will now be designed to much more evenly spread their casts onto the entire group, rather than just spam casting a single target into submission. This, I think, will help healers quite a bit in low to mainstream pug keeps. But on the other hand, I do know that this particular change is not proven popular with some of the higher end players, who very much enjoy the challenge of having to juggle multiple plates. But this does raise one big question, which is what about delves, where solo holy priests in particular, who currently have no interrupts, often struggle. The team do promise to take this into account when designing their solo challenges, but sadly they haven't shared any specifics in that, which I think veteran healers will be taking with a massive pinch of salt. By far, the biggest feature of the alpha so far has of course been the impending lockdown and combat add-ons, combined with widespread concerns from the community about the ability of the planned improvements to the built-in user interface to fill the gaps. This week, Blizzard have stepped in with a brand new developer blog providing a little bit more detail on their plans and confirming for the very first time what many add-on authors have been suspecting, which is that Blizzard's initial alpha launch contained the most locked down version of the add-on changes possible, with the developers' plan being to gradually relax those restrictions in response to feedback wherever they were found to be going too far. This update also reiterates that Blizzard's ultimate plan is to continue to enable add-ons to fully reskin the user interface, and that further changes to the add-on APIs will be coming in the near future as they try to reduce the knock-on effects of the lockdown and combat add-ons. My overall takeaway is that we should not expect any major changes in direction from the dev team for combat add-ons, especially for tools like Omni CD and Weak Orders, which I'm fairly confident will not be a thing in Midnight. In my opinion, this announcement did provide some useful context to their plans, but it is context that should have been shared with add-on creators prior to the first alpha release. Dropping that overly locked down version of the add-on API at the start of alpha without any explanation severely damaged add-on authors' trust in the process. And while this announcement will help to start the process of recovering that, it is much harder to recover lost trust than it is to earn it in the first place. This update, which I will link down below, also shared some examples of the customizations in action, but the most interesting announcement to me was the fate of healing in raid frames, an area that has been called out by many followers of this process as the biggest gap in the default user interface. Put simply, many healers and indeed other players feel that the current group frames are simply not fit for purpose. Thankfully, the development team are now announcing that group frames are going to be getting an update, offering a choice of different layouts inspired by popular add-ons like Cell and Voodoo, along with improved ways to highlight dispels and tank swap debuffs. These changes are very welcome, but I think there is still one major gap, which is the ability for players to add filters to remove things that aren't relevant to them. For example, if you don't have a poison dispel, seeing a poison debuff on the group frames just adds unnecessary visual clutter. That said, Blizzard are clearly listening to feedback in this process, so hopefully that gap will also be filled in the near future. And finally, there is some interesting news on the data mining front. As always, do keep in mind that this is speculation and subject to change, but Wowhead have data mined some calendar entries for a possible 6-week long event, which has some very interesting timing. This event would begin on weekly resets on the week of January 27th and would end globally in March the 9th. Now, the 27th of January is 8 weeks after the release of patch 11.2.7 and therefore already speculated as a likely start date for the pre-patch. Now, historically, pre-patches tend to last for 4 to 6 weeks. In recent expansions, we have seen 5-week pre-patches, with the event starting a couple of weeks into the pre-patch, but a 6-week long pre-patch event has occurred in the past, for example in Legion, so it would not be unprecedented. World of Warcraft expansions usually launch globally on a Monday, and March the 9th is indeed a Monday, and in fact, this event would be ending just 6 hours before the normal start time for an expansion's global release, which means this is all lining up suspiciously well with a potential expansion release date. Of course, this does not guarantee that Midnight really will launch in March the 9th. This could well be something else, or even a developer having a laugh with us. And even if it is the dev team's current plan, they are of course free to change this anytime before their official announcement, so please don't go making any plans based on that date. I did take a look at how much notice we normally get for an expansion release date, and for the last 2 expansions we got about 2.5 months notice, which does make me think that if these dates are to be borne out, we can expect the release date to be announced just before the holiday break in December. That's all from the alpha, but before I wrap up, I do have one little reminder. The Hallows End event is running right now and is offering a chance at a brand new high-res version of the Headless Horseman's Mount. This is a chance to drop from the first run of the Headless Horseman that you do each day account wide. This event will be ending next Saturday morning, November the 1st, so you better get cracking. Immediately following for this event on the same Saturday is the Day of the Dead, a 2-day long mini holiday event that offers a bunch of themed toys which apply cool costumes and an armor set for the Cliffside Wilder Drake. To get started on the day, just head over to the main graveyard in Stormwind or Orgrimmar. But that's it for this week. I'd be really interested to hear all of your thoughts in this week's update. Are you excited by an add-on free future, or do you think Blizzard's plans are going to end in tears? Sound off down below. If you found this week's update helpful, entertaining, or even just plain annoying, then let me know by hitting that like icon. And if you want to support my channel to grow and help me to make more of these videos along with my other content, then hit that subscribe button right now before you forget. If you don't want to miss out whenever I release a new video, then as well as subscribing, you can follow me in social media for updates. My links in the description below as well. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.